How was your workshop yesterday?
It's great. It's talk about sabotage,
What kind of touch?
self-sabotage.
Oh, sabotage, self-sabotage.
Right, self-sabotage.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's see if I can get you share something with you. The way that listed it was nine nine types of sabotage. Let me put it
Yeah.
let me put it on the chat thing here. So let's see.
Was it in person or online?
Everybody's online. Everything is Zoom. It's on the chat right now.
So is my audio scratchy or
You're
staticky?
good. You're good. You're good
Okay.
now.
All right, thanks.
You have improved.
I think the problem was I was in the past setting my microphone sensitivity too high and
Yeah,
that's picking up too much, random stuff. So now I set it to a reasonable range. So I think that's better.
that's good. Where are you right now?
I am in my duck house kitchen slash dining area slash listening area. In fact,
I didn't see the background. That's why I can't tell.
yeah. So let me
Here
unblur
we
my
go.
background.
I'll blur out.
Let me unblur. Pismo Beach, California.
Okay.
Okay, so there is my living room slash listening area, my music listening area,
Big speakers.
and there is my kitchen,
Okay.
and there's the door to the outside.
To the ducks.
Exactly. So I'm sitting at the dining table right now.
That's cool. Thank you.
So I like to bounce around different areas of the house occasionally. Gives a different view.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, I posted the 9 self-sabotage rule that people take. So, one way to deal with it is like, okay, this is self-sabotage. How do I deal with it? How do I fight it? How do I conquer it? What have you? And my strategy, is that every sabotage role has a gift. If you can figure out the gift that the sabotage role that give you, then you can receive the gift without the negative, whatever you want to call that. I hate the name because it's not what it is. It's like controller. So, for example, the first one, the controller. Why do I want to put my controller header that you must do it this way, you better do it this way, that the reason I'm doing this way because I care about you, I love you, it's important for you to get the result you want. I want to make sure I protect you and all that stuff. So the question is, how could I do that without being controlling? It's a very common, and I have a head start. That's why I tell the group that about 35 years ago, I started selling computers, and one of my customers, what become a dear friend and best friend and all that stuff, was there's a software called Business Acumen. And what it does is that it asks you like a whole bunch of questions. Like I don't remember anymore. It's like maybe 80 questions, 10 questions for each subject or something along that line. And after you answer all the questions, then it give you a chart. Are you a good manager, or which area you need to improve and all that stuff? So I worked on that chart for a long time to make sure I got it and figure out how to get it. And so, for example, no micromanagement or something along that line. It's the same thing as controlling, right? So it's like, how could you do that? How could you accomplish that goal without, doing the bad behavior activity thing?
So
Yeah.
should we rate ourselves on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 on each of these? How many are there? 8, 10,
9.
9? I
Yeah.
doubt that most of us are that self-aware. Say that again, Sam. I said I doubt that most of us are that self-aware that we could accurately assess ourselves. I would think that we would rate ourselves and rate the other two
or 3, however many people come, and to notice what you just said, that our self model doesn't agree with our other, how do you say it? How others see us.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I think the 3 of us could probably do a very interesting experiment that way, because we're likely to be candid with each other.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's the case with most gatherings.
Yeah, you're right about self-calibration is terrible. The example I gave was the lighthouse is only good on the beach, not on your boat. Yeah. You cannot calibrate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you mark your position in the lake on the side of the boat. Like, I'm not at all controlling.
You're not.
I'm not at all a hyperachiever. I'm not at all restless.
Of course not.
I'm not at all people pleasing. I'm not at all hyper vigilant. I don't avoid anything. I'm never a victim. I'm never rational. Anyway, would you like to do that, or would you like to do the thing that I was trying to get Barry to talk about for about a week and a half, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5?
Yeah, whatever works for you. Whatever is useful. I'm here to have some fun. I don't want to have an expectation that we must do.
Yeah, we're not trying to do, a workshop here without paying you either.
But you can use the material workshop to indicate while we are proceeding on our project. How's that?
Sure. Let's do that. So
you're being a controller right now. Don't do that.
Do what I say. Because I want the best for all of us.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's one either that's missing or it simply doesn't belong.
What?
We should stop and say hello to Joshua first.
Hi, Josh.
Hello, guys.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Oh, Joshua doesn't get to see the chat that you already put in, does he?
He does.
The chat doesn't include what Sam posted a lot. No, okay, you have to repost it for Joshua's benefit.
That's easy.
These are 9 traits of people who are self-sabotaging themselves. 9 kinds of self-sabotage.
Well, there's clearly something missing. Like stupidity is one.
No, you can't use stupidity. So what were you going to say, Barry, about that's one that doesn't quite belongs or may not belongs?
Well, because one of my tendencies is whenever I see a parameter, a nameable parameter, I ask myself, is that the end of an axis, and what's its opposite? Well, what would be the opposite of it that defines an axis? That's not always useful, but often at times it is. And the first one you had on your list was the controller.
Right.
And the complement, and this comes from the mathematics of feedback control theory, the complement of the controller is the observer. Notices everything, but controls nothing, just reports what they see objectively. And I'm wondering if the observer, sort of like the journalist or the note keeper,
the fair witness you're getting at.
The fair witness, the fair witness who bears witness, bearing fair witness. Is that self-sabotaging, or does that simply not belong in a list like this?
I think it could be.
Well, so what would be first of all, what would be the downside to oneself if you're one who bears fair witness as a practice? And number 2, how could that be exploited? Because that was what Sam said is one of the things, is that you can find how to exploit, how others might exploit that. Right.
I want to give it another perspective also. So at times you want to be the controller as well because it's useful. So for example, when you try to land an airplane, when you're driving your car, you want to be the controller because it serves a good use. So in this part is about when you do this behavior, it is giving you negative results. in that regard. So that's not quite implicitly explained. So
I'll give you an example. I was a passenger in a small Piper Cherokee airplane that one of my housemates co-owned with a bunch of people. Once in a while, we'd go out for a spin in it. And one day we were out in pretty bad weather, and we decided we needed to land at some airport, small plane airport, because the weather was getting bad. And everybody was kind of a little discombobulated because we didn't even know for sure where we were. And we were following another airplane in who was going to lead us in to a small airport somewhere in New Jersey. And as we're landing, I look out to the left and right, and I realized that the pilot, who was my housemate, hadn't lowered the flaps. And I simply said in a very quiet voice, "No flaps." And then he adjusted the flaps so that we would have a not too bumpy of a landing. But I was the observer, and I was very careful about how I said "no flaps."
Yeah.
You were not purely just an observer.
I knew that no flaps was not an optimal state for landing.
That's the observation.
Yeah, that was knowledge.
But then you did take action.
But articulating by bearing fair witness or critical witness, and also the tone of voice and the volume in which I said it, I very carefully chose to say "no flaps."
Yeah. When I hear what you're saying, it has so many components in this, what you just did. The first one, I think the most important is your pacing. You're breathing, or you're pacing the pilot very well. You know what language, what tonality, what all the parameter you need to in order to communicate. And you only have a very small, that's why I say, bandwidth, that narrow spectrum that you will receive your FM radio, whatever you want to call it, into his head. So that's that. And you're not scaring and startle him so that he make mistake. At the same time, you also have the knowledge about airplane, that you have all the comprehensive, and you know exactly, you're very precise, and you are master of the conditions that you can give only that small 2 words, command, I would call that, to him, that he will be able to gladly accept it, because he's an authority. To accept command from an authority, from another authority, is very difficult.
Yeah. And I would say that practice of being a fair witness who articulates the true state of affairs where it's relevant.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the traits that helped me make my living, among others, and stay alive. More importantly, just to be functional where I don't have any power. I don't have my hands on the controls.
Yeah.
I'm just a passenger in the back seat.
Yeah. Because if he go down, you go down with him.
Yeah, and it was a difficult situation because we're in a fog, and we couldn't see anything, and he just neglected to set the flaps at because you want to land. So basically, as you slow down, it keeps you from falling out of the sky. The
right. The what they call the floatability.
Fallibility. So that's rule number 1: stay alive.
That's what I say. Pilot's rule: screw all the FAA's regulation.
But it was very important about not being a backseat driver.
Yeah, exactly.
Just an observer.
Yeah, so much wisdom in what you just say. It's you have to see it, and you analyze it, and take all the parameter apart and put it all back together to make it I call that a masterpiece. I always say it's a great example of what the masterpiece is all about.
But I do wonder whether playing the role of the non-controlling observer has any element of self-sabotage, or whether it's neutral with respect to self-sabotage. I actually don't know the answer.
I think the key is the way Sam Chan expressed it. If you can actually understand what negative effects it's having. If it's having no negative effects, then of course it's not. self-sabotage. But if there are negative effects, number one, you potentially don't see how that behavior is leading to those negative effects, or you do understand it, and then you can actually take some different behavior.
Yeah, and that's where I think I'm not probably very good at estimating the psychological effect on other people, because other people are such a huge spectrum of psychologies that how would you know on any one individual? This guy would be a housemate.
In your example, you precisely knew this other individual, the pilot. He was your neighbor or a roommate or whatever, so you knew him pretty well.
Right? Yeah, I did.
Now, contrast what Sam Chan was saying, which was instead of using 2 words, you could have said 2 paragraphs about, well, their aeronautics say that we need to have the certain, airflow in a certain different way. And the control over there is how you affect that airflow. And so it's over there on your left instead of that run on the right, which probably takes, you all the way down to about 100 feet.
Yeah.
But you found the exact right 1 or 2 bits of information to convey. And you knew that the other person could understand exactly those 2 bits in the time required.
2 syllables, no flaps.
That's right. Yeah. That's being concise, that's being direct, that's being, understanding of the person you're communicating with.
Yeah.
And you're understanding how the information would be ingested by that person. That's very key. So it's not about whether you've got the knowledge, it's about how the knowledge is delivered or transmitted. Also.
And using vocabulary terms that the other person will instantly decode. And that's right. What are you talking about?
Kind of flapping.
Yeah. And the key really is also so there's so many keys in here. I don't want to de-emphasize the other key. One of the key, really important keys that you express in the tone of voice.
Right.
That he's an authority. That he said, don't tell me what to do. I'm a pilot here. It's that kind of authority. And you come in as another authority that you're slightly, gently, compassionately blend in, and he can accept that because he see that was a flaw, that it will kill the both of you. And he gladly accept that, even though he's an authority. And remember when he's an authority, he has all this bulletproof vest and all the guard, because he's there he's a protector for the plane.
So that's one I think it's worth chewing on, at least in my case, because being an observer is a role that I often play.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
So I put in the chat, isn't that what we expect journalists to be, which is fair witnesses, right? This
objective
state.
Yeah.
Supposed to be that society with a whole group of people exercising this profession called journalism, which is being fair witness. That's my understanding of journalism. And that's completely, to 98% eroded today. Just look at, what CNN is doing. We could have told them.
What is CNN doing? I haven't watched them. What are they doing?
They're slanting right again. But, if you understand, Ted Turner was the founder of CNN. You could have foretold this 40 years ago.
Founded CNN? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Ted Turner founded CNN.
I know he had TBS, the Turner Broadcasting System.
Yep, right around the same time. Right around.
I didn't know they were connected.
I think ESPN came out of that also.
Really? I think Disney owns ESPN now. I heard a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Story about a fight between ESPN and some cable channel.
But anyway, journalism, because it's owned by only a few moguls, doesn't have the objectivity it used to have for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So now you get small little sources, maybe even individuals just doing little blogs, putting together their little pieces here and there. And now it's up to some larger activity to sort of piece all of this together, because just listening to the major media only gives you one very, very biased slant.
My high school principal had a phrase, the word to the wise is sufficient. And I like that. But again, going to the opposite, what do you say to the fool? If the word to the wise is sufficient, what do you say to the fool?
You don't let them vote.
Well, don't
Josh
elect him
wants
to
to
my
say
office.
something.
Did Josh raise his hand or just wait?
I did. Yeah. I said you say to the fool, "What's up, homie?
Say it again.
What's up, homie?
What's up, homie?
Yeah, what's up, homie?" That's what you say to the fool.
But then you have to listen to them, and if you don't want to listen to the fool,
No, you also
You
say,
don't have to do anything.
I pity the fool.
I pity the fool to listen to me.
You know where that
somebody
reference came
posted
from?
that the other day. I pity the fool. That's the lyric of a popular song from like 40 years ago, isn't it?
It came from, Josh probably knows who that came from.
Mr.
Pretty
T.
sure.
Mr. T, professional
Mr.
wrestler.
T, yeah. Oh, he didn't sing it as a lyric. Just said it.
You just said it on a famous TV show called The A-Team, and you were right, Sam. He came from professional wrestling.
He even said it when he was in professional wrestling. His line
Okay.
came during wrestling interviews.
Okay, but it wasn't a song lyric.
Yeah, that's. Have you guys listened to any of Eric Weinstein's talks in the last couple of years?
As few as possible.
Okay, well, he compares the whole media landscape to K-pop, which is the popular wrestling back in the late 70s, early 80s, which is where Mr. T comes from. And it's the idea of playing the character and the narrative that you're playing towards the audience of I'm the good guy, and then switching it to being the bad guy. Like, I don't know if you guys ever watched professional wrestling,
Oh,
but
well,
it's
yeah. Back in the 50s, it was ballet. Well, not ballet. What's the word I'm looking for?
Choreographed.
Choreographed, yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not choreographed anymore, Barry.
Some of my classmates used to go to the wrestling. There was a guy called Haystacks Calhoun. Guy, it was like 600-pound guy. He was sort of the local famous character in professional wrestling, but it was all choreographed. Good guys and the bad
yeah.
guys.
Yeah, just like the media was all choreographed back in the 50s and 60s
There's
and all written and scripted.
Yeah.
It
And
comes
political conventions, they started choreographing political conventions, I think, around the 1960s. They had a few in the 1950s that weren't, and they were disasters. So
anyway, I think we're digressing. So
Actually, I'm progressing. I'm trying to get to a point is that you can actually learn a lot. It's not something you would think, oh, well, that's wrestling. That's nothing. That's actually our society now is K-Fab wrestling. So I'm saying if you really look into it deeply, Sam, you'll see the same exact playbook from 1982 in professional wrestling is what's going on in 2023 in our media landscape. It's the same thing.
So go further, because I know there are faces and heels. I know that there's a whole organization behind these storylines. But what more than that?
Smash Mouth.
Pick any person of interest at the moment and watch how the narrative changes, and you'll see the same storyline.
Put
Whether
down
it be
Smash Mouth.
like Don Lemon, for example, with CNN. He was the nice guy, the one that everyone likes, the good wrestler, and now where's Don Lemon? What happened to his character?
That happens everywhere.
Nobody pays attention to Goody Two Shoes. They like, except people pay attention to Taylor Swift.
Well, I'm saying he got fired. You guys missed that part?
I didn't know he got fired.
He did something and got fired, yes, but that happens everywhere. That's not just. I'm trying to see what more you're drawing with the analog to professional wrestling.
I'm saying the characters that are media sensations, whether they be Chris Hedges with Hardball. You name the character that's in the news or that's on as a public figure, and they're playing more of a wrestling role where they pretend to hate a certain person, and they have these fights back and forth, these feuds with other networks, like Jon Stewart, for example, with Fox News, and he's fighting back and forth. I'm saying it's all a narrative that's very similar, if not identical, to professional wrestling.
Yeah, fake feuds for publicity.
I still don't see it. I think it's more general than that.
Okay, well, look into it yourself.
That guy in tennis with braggadocio guy in tennis who wanted to play Billie Jean King, and he was always trying to. I can't remember his name. I can't remember anybody's name, but there was I think it was in tennis.
Yeah, he was like in his 50s or 60s at the time. He was like number 60 something or 70 something in the world in men's tennis. And he played Billie Jean King and I think lost.
I think she creamed him, but he was full of braggadocio. But it was all about publicity because people wouldn't go to see it. They would pay money to go see him get creamed. And she played along. I don't know whether it was scripted or whether it was just ensnared, but people love these cat fight scenarios, good guy versus bad, protagonist, antagonist scenarios.
So I think this whole good guy, bad guy thing is very general. It's everywhere. I don't see that it just is rooted in any one given domain.
We played a game as kids called King of the Mountain. Whoever was King of the Mountain, everybody tried to tear him down. You always try to tear down the top guy. That was a classic dynamic. Choose somebody to be the king, and then you basically gang up on him.
I just posted something on the chat that I would do 2.5 hour conversation with someone that introduced me to this. I want to share that with you guys.
Please. I'll stop being hyper rational as your chart stated. I'll stop the hyper rational character.
You want to read it out loud, Barry?
Perhaps Howard Thurman. First of all, help me remember who is Howard Thurman. At least what role in life?
He's a mentor for Martin Luther King.
Oh, okay. Perhaps Howard Thurman provides us the next stage in our understanding of and response to issues of race, diversity, inclusion, and equity, a stage that transcends and includes the important contributions of the current perspective. Quote, all social issues, unquote, he said, quote, are temporary and brief. Go deep. And the source is Dobelmeyer, 2018. So he was a mentor to Martin Luther King. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
He has a church in San Francisco. And if you're interested, I can send you more material, but you can also get the YouTube video on him giving lectures and all that stuff. So we talk about a lot of issues that like you say, the kingmaker, all that stuff, a lot of dramatization of the social problem. And the drama lasted only so long.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the current thing about being woke, which I think is slang terms come up like that and they capture your attention, but it's simply being aware, being aware of subtle patterns which are persistent and significant, but kind of just below radar. There are things that are called subliminal. They're just below radar, but they're there and they're persistent. And if you're a keen observer, you detect these persistent patterns that have consequences, long-term consequences, and you elevate them above radar. And then they call that woke. And there's this funky argument about whether it's good or bad to be woke, that is aware of subtle patterns in the culture that have long-term detrimental effects.
Anyway, when he said that, he got into a lot of trouble. A lot of people disagree with him.
Thurman got in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's, like what you say, something is permanent, something long-term, whatever, it's disagree with what he just say, which is all social issue are temporary and brief, go deep. Yeah, it's a pretty much... Yeah.
Right. And if you go deep, then the things which are subliminal, just below radar, become readily apparent. If you put on a snorkel and you get your eyes below the surface of the water, you begin to see things that are there, which are hard to see if you're looking down from above the surface of the water.
Yeah. The way I think about it is I think about the timeline,
What is that?
So some people, the future means what's for breakfast or what's for lunch. For some people, the future is 1,000 years from now, right?
Is that Belgian waffles or something? Or
So Gail just made me some eggs and ham on a bagel, it looks like, or bread. So
Okay.
she just made me breakfast.
Oh, Gail.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. No, I mean,
Kudos to the chef.
I don't know what to make of this statement. I haven't come across it before, but it seems like a tautology. All phenomena are temporary in one sense. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the context is here.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Temporary for what? 15 years versus temporary for 15
Yeah,
minutes.
for 400 years or 1,000 years or 6,000
That's
years,
right.
that's still temporary.
Right.
Yeah. And the longer the time frame at which you look at a pattern that is not sustainable, the more significant it is, because that's how you get apocalypse, is the collapse of a long-lasting pattern which is not sustainable forever. It's going to collapse eventually. And the theologians were among the first to point out that these cultural practices are not sustainable. They're going to eventually cause a collapse of civilization or some other detrimental effect.
But the reason I introduced this moment is that the no flap, because of the no flap, you are here to be able to communicate with us. Without the no flap, you may not be here.
Or we might have just had a very hard landing and damaged the airplane. We probably would have survived, but we would have had a very bad landing and a very bad story to tell.
Yeah.
About
And you may
some dinky little airport in western New Jersey in a foggy day and no way home and busted airplane. By the way, there were 4 people who owned that airplane, and I didn't know the other 3 owners. But one of them took it out a day and went down somewhere in New York Bay or New York Harbor, and that was it. The phrase is he bought the farm. Not my roommate, a different owner, but that plane, one day, a year or 2 later, one of the other owners, something went wrong and he bought the farm in New York Bay.
You were not there.
No, I mean, I heard about it because the guy, eventually says, well, the Piper Cherokee Arrow, it doesn't exist anymore. And he briefly told the story, but I didn't know the other 3 guys who were co-owners. So.
Yeah.
I actually once flew that plane. 3 of us flew down to the where did we fly to? The Caicos and what's the islands right off of Florida where they do gambling? Not Barbados. It's the
Keys.
Bermuda, not Bermuda. It's B Island. I don't know. Anyway, we flew to the Caicos Islands, and 2 things I did. One is that I learned to fly in the suit, just reading the instruments and maintaining level flight. And I did a takeoff. On the Caicos Islands, there was a gravel runway, and he let me do the takeoff. So actually, and I also learned to do radio navigation, RNAV. I learned a lot on that little plane on a couple of flights. Once we went to watch the guy's one of the roommate's sister was in some kind of sports. It's in her college in Pennsylvania. We flew to Pennsylvania, flew to the Caicos Islands, and other flights. And yeah, I actually learned a little bit about flying. This little Piper Cherokee Arrow. November 2112 Tango. That was the call letters. We're talking about 1970s, I think. Late 1970s.
Lots of fun memories.
Yeah, learning to fly an airplane, flying instruments, and do radio. One story is interesting story is radio navigation. They have these highways in the sky, where you're supposed to stay on these particular routes, and most of the time when there's a turn on the highway, it's right over one of the radio navigation beacons. So you fly to the beacon, and then when you get to the beacon, you turn to a new direction and fly away from it. But every once in a while, there's a dog leg where there's no beacon at the dog leg. And the question is, how do you know when you get to this vertex, and how do you turn? And the way you do it is you dial in 2 different radio stations, 2 different beacon stations. And there's a kind of a mathematical calculus that tells you what you do is you set up a virtual beacon. The radio allows you to dial in 2 real beacons and then synthesize a virtual beacon. So you fly to the virtual beacon, and then when it goes from the to the from, that you're approaching versus leaving it. And so I said let's learn to do that, because we got a dog leg coming up. So we figured it out. He explained to me how you're supposed to do it. I sort of did the math in my head. We fly to the beacon. The little flag goes from the from to the to. I say, okay, left turn, and I give him a new direction. And he does the left turn, a new direction. I said, okay, now we dial in the next downstream beacon. And if we're on course, it'll zero out. So he dials in the next downstream beacon, and the little guy goes, zoop, right, smack it. And he says, pretty damn good. That was the very first time, learning to do, tricky RNAV. So yeah, well, I learned a lot of fun stuff. I mean, we practiced some technology that was non-trivial stuff.
You trust your life with the instrument.
Well, if you're flying in the fog and you can't see the ground, you got to fly RNAV. And every once in a while, you don't have visual flight rules. You have
That's right.
What's the alternative of visual flight rules? Instrument flight rules. IFR.
Instrumental. Yeah.
And you have these radio beacons that you fly to and from to chart your course.
All right, Sam, take it away. Whatever you want to talk about. This is your chance. Again.
Mr. You've made the statement often that rule-based systems lead to chaos.
Yeah.
So I understand conditions in which that happens.
Yep.
I believe there are conditions in which that is not necessary.
Yeah, it depends on the gain of the feedback loop as a key parameter.
So,
There's actually a constant called Mitchell-Feigenbaum's constant, which essentially says at what point do you enter a chaotic regime in a certain mathematical sense. So rules in a very simple case make for a fair game. Now it's still a game, so you can't predict very far the course of the game, but at least it's fair and it's not going off the rails. But the notion that rule-based systems are inherently stable and predictable and well behaved, that's simply not true.
Yeah, that could be falsified.
That's the whole point. So the axiomatic belief that rule-based systems are the way to do it, that's a huge misconception in human civilization that dates back 6,000 years. That's what I want to overthrow.
Sorry, my dog is getting into trash. Sorry.
I wanted to overthrow the axiom that was the foundation of the rule of law, was based on this axiom that all you need to do is get a really good set of rules and follow them, and you're golden. And the answer is no, you're not. And you're going to get into chaotic situations time and again where you don't see it coming because you have this false belief.
Let's build this up from small cases. Okay, so suppose we all live in a village. Okay.
Yep.
We have only one rule. Okay, and that rule is be kind to each other. Okay, that's the only rule. No other rule. Now, do you imagine that system will become unstable or stable?
I can give you a scenario where I think it will go unstable.
But what about special
case? Not in general. I can give you a scenario where being kind.
There's always corner cases to every system. Okay.
Exactly.
Always.
Exactly.
Okay? So since in the extreme we at least have one existence proof, although it's not really proven, but we're taking it, tacitly, that if you have that one rule in a village, that's not necessarily going to lead to chaos.
No, you can find situations where you will survive, and you can create anomalous situations where that rule will cause disaster. Okay,
all right, fine. So at least on one end, we can say there's an existence proof that rule-based systems don't necessarily lead to chaos.
No, I never claimed that.
Well, that's the large implication of many of the times this has come up. So that's what I wanted to lead into.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I agree with you that if you have, let's say, functions underlying the models on which you're writing rules or creating rules, you get closer, quote unquote, to a workable system. But those function-based systems can just as well be unstable.
Yep.
You have to have the right functions. You have to have the right constraints.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily the case that just do a function-based system and you're going to have stability.
No,
that's also
you got to have the right function. You have to compute a function that is a good approximation to the inverse of the system model that characterizes the system you're trying to regulate.
Right.
That's the hard part.
So you could say that with a combination of well-written rules and well-written functions, we can devise what we think is a stable system.
Right.
But that's the trickier part. That's the part I really want to ask about, because the question is, are we capable of doing that? We're currently not doing it at all. Okay.
Some people are. I mean, they do it in some feedback control loops are very well engineered.
We're talking about governance, okay? Social governance
here. I have no faith in governments.
Well, we have to have some
who are in government are not engineers.
We as social beings live in a society, so something's got to establish protocols among us, okay? So either it's anarchy or it's something else. That's the question I really want to lean into, is how do we construct a system of functions and rules or models so that we can get closer to a stable society? Now, by the way, in 2017, April, and Josh, I do see your hand, but I just want to finish this point. The Global Challenges Foundation issued a challenge for how we could modify the workings of the United Nations so that we create a better world for ourselves. So had we known each other in 2016 or 2017, you would have been co-author on this proposal that was submitted on September 30th to the Global Challenges Foundation by Tammy Lee Meyer and myself. So, given that was way in the past, and now we're 6 years later, 7 years later? So, yeah, 7 years, 6 years later, I want to figure out, okay, let's ask the same question. How would we modify the workings of social systems so that we get more stability and, let's say, civil good, social good in our system? Over. That's my question. Over. So, Josh.
Josh is
thank you. I think the same exact problem is being tackled over at the Tesla company when they're trying to do the full self-driving, which they've been trying to do for years. And the rule-based system is C++, and they're building out all these rules, but it's not quite working for perturbations in the system, like a dog running out, things that, are not in the C++ code. So there's times when the rules, it needs to break the rules to be safe and go around the object, but the rules-based system is keeping it in the lane that it's programmed to be kept in. So what they did to solve that, and they just did this last April, is they took a bunch of examples of the best drivers in a car and little video clips of 8 to 10 cameras going through these different scenarios and letting the neural network learn from how a human would handle that, so it can decide how it would handle it in those perturbation systems. And so just 2 weeks ago, they showed off a demonstration of this system using not C++ code, but neural network artificial intelligence. And it's going to take many, many more hours, if not millions of hours of more training. But they want the training to be done on people that are better drivers than others. So with that same type of logic and reasoning, if we did that here at GCC, and we had conversations where people disagree, and how the pathway of the conversation goes around the disagreement and how it gets solved at the end, back on track, if you will. If you do the same thing with full self-driving in a car, with full self conversations, if you will, conversational technology, it's possible that you could have enough scenarios with intelligent people that solve the perturbations of social implications of problems in conversational, and also hence government, like you asked, Sam. Does that make sense? And with that, I'm complete, if that makes perfect sense. That would be my solution to the problem, is to record enough conversations with different people from areas of all walks of life, all cultures, and different languages, and see how they solve these different hard problems. And so,
Testing, testing.
Have you seen the video from iRobot of the? Did you want to say something, Sam?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Josh, if that's
Okay, I'll stop.
So it's great that they're able to find 20 good drivers and record them. I'm not sure we can find 20 good collaborators and conversations, but
not 20, 100 million drivers. So
Yeah.
right now they might have 30,000 to 60,000 going through hundreds, if not hundreds of millions of miles. So we're talking about a large, I mean, take every recorded conversation here at GCC in hours. That's definitely over 6,000, I think. What would you say, Sam?
something like that. I mean, it's been at least 5 years and 4 hours per week. So it's it's about 50 weeks a year. That's 25 weeks for it's probably at least 100 hours. Is that right? It's
No, that's not right.
4 times 50 is 200 times 5. Oh, it's about 1,000 hours. Yeah, right. It's about 1,000 hours.
Yeah, and it was before 4 days a week at the beginning. So
Right.
I'm saying if you took those, and also there was at least, I would say, anywhere roughly between 300 to 400 people conversing throughout that whole time.
Yeah, I lose track. But yeah, I think your point is if we can say, okay, which conversations went awry? In other words, which conversations crashed? And which conversations reached a satisfactory or useful end? Okay. In other words, they arrived, at their destination safely. Then those conversationalists slash drivers, okay, should be, let's say, promoted as exemplars of good drivers slash good conversationalists versus the ones where things devolve and people call each other names and people get mad at each other and people leave, exactly. Okay. We've had many crashes here at GCC. Yeah. So rather than just focusing on the good drivers, I'm just saying we've got a lot of examples of things not going extremely well. But that's useful also to understand. It's good to know where the ravines are
And also,
are.
if you could take the conversation off, we're driving on a certain road, the GCC road. If you moved over to, say, Sam Chan's experiment, I'm very curious to know how it went yesterday with your experiment. But many different communities. So you take the best people from this community, move them to another community, take the worst from this community, move them to another community, and then see how they drive on those roads. Because some drivers of conversations might be speed drivers that are meant for racetracks, and others are meant for off-roading, so on and so forth, with the analogy.
Right. I see that. And in fact, that training set could come up with one of the things I've called mentor, which is an agent that could help any one of us, one by one, person by person, completely custom to each of us, explore any knowledge that we really wanted to learn. Because it knows how we learn, how we listen, how long or short our attention span is, whether or not we like music analogies versus hunting analogies, whether or not we like, certain words or some of them are politically sensitive and we get triggered by them. Yeah. So these training agents would know so much about us that if I say, hey, I want to learn, I don't know, how to graft something onto a tree, you'll know exactly how to teach me because it knows so much about me and so much about biology and knows how to marry the two together. That is possible like within days or weeks with the current technology. So yes, I agree with you that training set would give us a whole lot better basis on which to actually learn how to collaborate. In fact, it should do the collaboration for us. Over.
Great example. I really love this discussion. So let's look at the plant graving example you talk about. Specific conditions, specific environments, a lot of that example to learn from. good example to lean on and go towards and all that stuff. So in a human variable, there are thousands and thousands of variables. I mean, even the word good or bad, you can't even decide on the definition of good and bad, right? So the definition. So to give you all the way up to the 10,000 feet high view perspective, it would be, I would look at my business for the last 40 years, thousands and thousands of times. Should I have a partner? Should I partner with somebody and all that stuff? And my eventual conclusion is what Josh was just saying. Like Tesla is if you look at the structure carefully, the way that the C++ and the neural network and all the thing, it's that you have what I call you can consider as the source or the God that, like, I'm the boss. I get to decide what's best for me at each difficult situation because my butt is on the line. If my butt is not on the line, who cares? It's like we only have very limited attention span. We get distracted very easily. We can have second agenda. We don't even know that until it exists. Just like Steve Jobs says something like, I'm designing something that you don't even know you need it yet. If you flip it around, I have a second agenda that I don't even know I have until I see it. So again, and the reason I can stay focused is because of my Buddhist training and my psychology training and my life experience I've gone through that allow me to stay, be the true North Star, or I am where I am staying because my brother's on the line, plus all the conditions, just like the example Bear was talking about, because he had the knowledge about flying, he knows aerodynamic, he knows the strength, all the parameters have to all lined up. And you're flying in a heavy fog. We crash all the time and we never learn from it because people have other attention they want to focus on. Just like think of all the conversation we have from first second until now. We have so many subjects we got covered. How the hell are we going to get one thing done? None. So the bottom line is this: if you can build a structure, like if we can emulate what Tesla going through, we need millions of people, like good leaders in the world, to be able to have a collective decision-making platform that help them to collect all the wonderful wisdom all together. We might stand a chance. Other than that, and remember, the leaders have to have their butt on the line. They have to have been certified by other people to say, yeah, you are a good leader. There may be 5 people dominate you to be you can put a seat. So qualification, platform, structure, all that need to be coordinated carefully and with life at stake. I'm done.
Do you mind if I add on to that, Sam?
Please.
I think in the current modern day political landscape, if someone says they're a good leader, it's because we have to take their word for it. But if we had the metrics and the feedback to say, how did you handle these 400 different scenarios? And what is the data of how you handled that, of probabilities and ways of looking at it? So we're not just taking their word for it or taking other people's, I'm convinced that they're a good leader. They actually have something to show how they handled hard scenarios of these types of conversational what would be the word for disillusionment or conversational derailings, and how they led the path of that conversation back on track.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
thank you.
Yeah, appointment and disappointment.
Yeah.
There we go. Appointment and disappointment. Exactly. How do they stay on appointment?
So glad you say that. So let me bring in another factor of it. The kingmaker, right? Right now, the citizen is a kingmaker. When you give me what I needed, I will vote for you. You're buying my vote. Capitalists rob the democratic, if you want to link of it that way, perspective. So how did the political leader get to be political leader? Because we voted for our pocketbook, whatever you call that. So like, that's a structure that we kill ourselves because we need to survive better than the other guy. The majority become more majority and become richer. The minority get, whatever's left, for lack of better terms for it. So the current structure of political it's not going to get us what we need to get to. So forget about political leaders. They don't qualify for it because the structure destroyed them.
The better you have a system model, the more comprehensive and accurate a system model. And if you have the mathematics to solve the system model, and that's a key. Having a good system model and the ability to solve it, you can invert the system model, mathematically invert it, to compute or to construct the function that belongs in the feedback loop that gives you the best possible regulation of the system. And that's a key idea. I mean, basically, you take a course in cybernetic feedback control theory at a MIT or Stanford or Cornell, or whatever, and you realize, number one, get a really good model that predicts how the system is going to behave, and then solve it for the function that goes in the feedback loop. Now, you can try to do that for human systems. There are models of human systems. They're not one agreed upon model, but there's some pretty good models. And if you take the best models that I know of and you solve them for ethical best practices, you tend to get the teachings of the sages and the theologians and the people who basically are psychologists that you get the benefits. Traditionally, that was from the prophets and the theologians back 1,000, 2,000 years ago. Now you're going to get it from analysts and psychologists and strategists and so on. But you get people who are doing some kind of realistic model-based reasoning and coming up with non-trivial practices. So, for example, you're driving down the highway and you don't want to hit the car in front of you. So you have a very simple rule of thumb. Rule of thumb is for every 10 miles of speed, leave 1 car length distance between you and the car in front. And that's an easy to remember rule. And if you follow it, you'll probably never have a rear end collision. On the other hand, it leaves a lot of empty space on the highway so that you need more lanes to carry the traffic. Now, I can see in maybe 5 or 10 years where cars will reckon the distance to the car in front, and the cruise control will calculate how close you can be to the car in front and still have time to react if the car in front suddenly stops, which a human wouldn't be able to do. So you can get closer to a train where the cars are literally touching each other and don't collide because they're connected by a coupler, okay? And if you decouple them, how close can you be so that you don't, if the one in front stops, the one behind it doesn't hit it. And the whole idea is using that mathematics and that modeling to optimize the use of resources, at the same time maintaining a sensible level of safety and not wasting resources. And rule-based systems are crude because the decision making is based on a bogey, which is easy to compute but inefficient. And a lot of the work I did was saying, take these bogey-based systems, these kindergarten rules, and replace them by a more graceful function that we have the faculty of computing with modern technology so we can get more efficient use of resources. And what irks me is that our political system is using a model that's 6,000 years old, and it's rule-based, and it's not very good to begin with. And people break the rules because if you don't break the rules, the system is so bloody inefficient, it's in molasses. Somebody makes a rule and you're the guy who's really driving the train, and you go, if I follow those rules, we're never going to get anywhere. And so people will intentionally bend the rules. And if they get caught, they're going to be sacrificed. But if they don't bend the rules, the whole system is going to end up in molasses. So you get these work slowdowns where we're going to follow the rules. What happens is you get a big slowdown. And the argument is, well, if you can outperform a rule-based regulatory mechanism and reliably do it because you got people who know what they're doing, then why the hell wouldn't you introduce that? And when you get to automated systems, you can't. Because the systems are cruise controls and can compute things that a human being is just not very good at. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm still with you so far, but I wanted to at least also anticipate that rules are, in a sense, what we have because they're simple and they're understandable.
Exactly. And they're inefficient.
Functions, especially if we give functions to a variety of parameters that then, optimize across n-dimensional spaces, they're going to be more opaque. People won't understand them as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, look at the current models from neural networks and llamas and, GPTs, et cetera. Okay. Nobody can explain exactly what's going on there.
No.
Okay. So we have society working out a set of rules that people understand. You hit me, I hit you. Okay. That's simple. We understand what that means. Versus, let's take all the socioeconomic factors into account and feed into the $300 million supercomputer, and it'll tell us, okay, Barry, in addition to vacuum cleaners, I think you ought to pick up some skills in fixing plumbing. And Sam, instead of wasting your time, on this 5-acre place, you should subdivide it and take 2 acres and make it a home for, homeless women or something like that. So you could give a large agent all the parameters around society, and we wouldn't necessarily say, hey, is this fair? Is this fair to me? Right? We have this different notion of what fair means and what social justice means. So we have both ends of that conundrum. But I do think that systems that are more aware of socioeconomic health indicators ought to be leveraged more than they are. The simple case is $7.25. It's been that way for decades, right? In the meantime, as we know, CEO compensation has gone up hundreds fold. So we have very simple rules like, minimum wage ought to be $15 instead of $7.25. It's going to be just as stupid as $7.25 because it's not based on any deeper reasoning. You're just kicking a can down the road another few years. That's all you're doing.
It's not Lagrangian. Lagrange worked out the math, but almost nobody does Lagrange's method because the math is too damn hard. We've had Lagrange's method. I did my thesis on it at Stanford. It's not that we don't have the math, that we don't have the people who can do the math.
We don't have people who can explain the math and make it compelling to the people who vote. Because we have too many people who vote that don't care about the math. They just care that it's 15 and not $7.25 for now.
Yeah.
5 years from now, they're going to say, we need $16.29. It's going to be the same argument all over again.
Yeah.
Unless we have it rooted in a deeper, more responsive function, as you say, or model.
It's not that they don't care about the math, Sam, if I may correct you on that. It's because the person that wrote the math and know the math doesn't have the money to advertise on newspaper and the TV media and the YouTube, thousands of them, to educate the Homer society because there's no money in that. And the person that do the math is probably too poor to even do one YouTube to explain all that stuff. So again, it's all about beef is heavily advertised, but the vegetable is not heavily advertised. That's a symptom right there. So it's got.
Agreed. And that's a systemic issue. It's not just a fault of an individual.
Yeah.
It's our species. Call us Homo schleppians for nothing. It's just, the computers are now outpacing us in the functionality, the capacity, the speed, the efficiency, the function. And here we are where, first it was just the machines, just the labor-saving devices. The steam shovel and all their muscles were better than ours. Okay, and they used fuel more efficiently. Well, now they're doing information processing, outpacing us. It's not bad, but it's not the state of the art.
And you know what's just around the corner? Not only will it be able to drive better than we are, and we are all more or less accustomed to facing that when that happens, because we know it's inevitable, okay? But soon, like even weeks or months beyond that, we will have entities who are kinder than we are.
Yeah, absolutely. They're teaching social robots to be social.
Wait. I think that's a big implication because people are used to thinking that human values are human and only human, and that machines will not be able to do this. I think that's false.
Again.
I
Misconception.
think that's false.
Yeah.
If we're walking down the street and I give a homeless person, 50 cents because that's what I've got in my pockets, that's a token act. It's like, somebody sets up a GoFundMe for some village in Malawi and I give them $30. Okay, that's a token act. It feels like a token act because I'm not really making a dent, am I? Or am I?
You might be giving one person one meal. I had a friend who didn't give.
Better than zero meals.
I had a person who didn't give them cash. They would give them these little coupons that you could cash in at McDonald's. A piece of paper that was only good to buy a meal.
I know. I've given somebody an entire Happy Meal and have it be refused because they thought I was being condescending.
Well, that's knowing, how to intervene and make two people happy and not one mad. And this is where I screw up. I
am saying that because these large models can learn from Sam, from everyone, from Mother Teresa, if you still believe in her, from the Dalai Lama, etc., and then you can actually then deploy this thing that's been trained on all the most kindest people in the world, or whoever we consider kind. It could now be sitting in the back of my head saying, don't do that. Why don't you set up a GoFundMe for this person? Or why don't you invite this person into your home? Or why don't you just give them a constant stream of allowance? Or, why don't you set up another organization where many people could do all of this? And maybe it's, contribute to a nonprofit. I don't know what's the most impactful, but a moment spur action on the street is probably not the most well thought out action, but it's what I can do with my meager brain at the moment.
Yeah. Hey Google, what would Jesus do? Or hey Google, what would the Dalai Lama say? Maybe you can get some sage advice. Thanks to Chat GPT. Whether that will appear and be used, it's not inconceivable.
So if you move beyond kindness, I think a machine like that could also be a better lover, a better partner, rather than most of us in partnered relationships right now. Because many of us lose our temper. We could probably go to, Love GPT and say, hey, I just had this argument with my wife. What should I be doing? And it would be smarter than just me.
Yeah. There was a woman who said that the greatest challenge for her in terms of feedback is in intimate relationships. And she says her optimal practice is just to simply say the same word over and over. Lighter, lighter, lighter.
I don't get
the fact that she keeps repeating it means it's not quite landing. And it wouldn't make any sense to say lighter, sad. that clearly would be suboptimal. So
what am I
We
saying?
live in a harsh culture. We live in a rude, harsh culture.
I'm looking from a system perspective, right? So the Tesla with the car, rule-based, couldn't solve the problem because it's so many randomness in it, right? If you think of the randomness, it require you to have a neural network to be able to learn from the best driver. But then in the human factor, because the language, the lot of ambiguity and all that uncertainty and different agendas and all that stuff, then the next question is, we need something better than neural network in order to solve the human problem from a system perspective. We're taking a break.
I should explain. I have a colleague who I pick up to take him to the fix-it shop, and he keeps butt dialing me. He butt dialed me 3 times, and the first time I simply hung up, but then he butt dialed me again. So now I've left the phone open, and I thought I heard his wife speak, so I thought maybe she realized it, but no. So what's the kindest thing to do when somebody butt dials you?
Listen in to all the pillow talks.
I mean, I don't know where's the microphone on this machine. I don't even know where the microphone is located on it. but when I yelled lighter, I thought maybe his wife heard it over the phone.
When the bad that happened, that means the universe wants you to listen into the conversation. They need help.
Well, there was a whole lot of people. I heard a whole lot of voices. It was a cacophony. And I figured, well, it's Sunday. It's probably his grandkids. And I think the daughter who lives there with the grandkids, because there was like 4 or 5 voices. And it's an anomaly. And the thing is, the optimal best practice in an anomaly is essentially uncomputable in 0 time. You might ponder it, and this is the whole thing about feedback control loops, what they call the basin of attraction. How big of a perturbation can you reliably recover from smoothly, gracefully, efficiently? And what's the lip of the basin where you spill over the sides? You know, how much sloshing can you contain and recover from? And the notion of the size of the basin of attraction and what happens if the perturbation exceeds the perimeter of the basin, because now you're going to be in some kind of a crisis and recovery mode, and you have to completely change strategy. And I think these are useful things to think about.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Again, let's go back to the Tesla model, right? Rule-based can only get you so far. Neural-based, because of randomness of the car position and randomness of the route, all that stuff. I think we need beyond the neural network, whatever the next level of the neural network is, may or may not solve the problem that we did. Too many chaotics, too many uncertainty, too many ambiguity, too many, all the, beyond the car driving randomness. Neural network is not going to solve the problem.
But in that scenario,
I mean, these are neural networks, and they're, we see the limit of an 80 billion neural network. What's that?
Yeah, I know Josh and I both have our hands up, but Sam, in that case, would we be reasonable if we expected a human to behave well in that brand new, never before seen scenario? Because if we've taken 8 billion drivers in the world for the last 20 years, okay, and we have a large model that understands all of that, okay, then it is not reasonable, I would say, to expect a large model to perform better than humans would, let's say, in a brand new, never before seen situation. Because how well would a human do?
Well, that's another perspective. I want to bring it through in the ranch here. Sorry, I have to do it. The Tesla model is assuming that everybody want to drive safely and comfortably and get to the destination in one piece, right? But what if you have a person that tries to destroy you and go after you with good road rage and all that stuff? I doubt that Tesla model or neural network can handle the situation. It's not because it's not expecting that, because it's too random. It happened only once in a billion drivers habit or whatever. It's not worth the effort to dealing with that. But for the driver that get affected by it, it's life and death.
I think we can still handle that. I mean, there's supervised learning where you can actually talk about the benefits or outcomes. Anyway, Josh has his hand up.
These are great questions. And one of the scenarios that Tesla wants to do is to create an unbelievable situation where bombs are being thrown at the car, UFOs are coming out of the sky, something that is just so out of the ordinary to see how it handles it. Because the one thing we're not realizing is that what the car has that we don't have is 10 different eyeballs looking in all directions. That we don't have is we do what, 24 frames per second. You can go up to 30 frames per second. What the car has that we don't have is reaction time different than our motor skills of our muscles. So I'm saying there's a lot of things that the car has that we don't have. There's a lot of things we have that the car doesn't have. And the question is, when can it be probability? And that goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, Barry, of probabilities, exponentially better than a human being, which at this moment in time, if you watch most humans driving, they're distracted constantly. I just heard a podcast where a gentleman admitted that after an hour, he falls asleep. His insurance has gone up to $1,200 a month because of all the different distractions and accidents he gets into. He's just not a good driver. Um, he thinks he's a good driver, but he has to admit, I'm not a good driver because after an hour I fall asleep, whereas cars don't. And they don't have a passenger distracting them. So on and so forth. There's a lot of things that we can look at as far as perturbations in the system. And it goes back to what Barry always talks about is the full feedback loop of reaction and timing. How quick, it's not a question of is it making the right decision? Because humans have never made the right decision in the history of humanity. We make the best one we can, we learn from it, we move on. But can it make a decision in a way that is on a probability scale exponentially better and safer? I think that comes down to we've solved this problem with automation of flying in the sky. You always hear that phrase, it's safer in the air than on the ground. And a lot of that has to do with the automation of flying and the differences of objects coming at you in the air versus on the ground, and the different scenarios of, is it actually safer to fly than to drive a car? I think the answer is yes. I think it's the facts are there.
Another thing that Teslas can do is you have a Mayday situation where things are basically beyond the basis of control. Airplanes have a black box. You have to recover the black box. Teslas can have Mayday telemetry. If an abnormal situation arises, they can broadcast to the central office all the data with a Mayday red flag and collect real-time, accurate observations of what's happening in a crisis situation. And we can learn from the crises because we're getting real-time data. That's a wonderful feature for learning how to handle anomalous situations.
Yeah, and let's just remember they're putting humanoid robots with the exact same system that they have in the car onto walking paths and in workplace scenarios, which will be able to do what we just talked about of recording every conversation.
Okay.
Nice robots will be in the same room as maybe stenographers in a political arena or a courtroom, taking down all the conversations, but they will have the feedback loop and the hearing capabilities that are 10, if not 100 times better than a human, where they can isolate each individual in the room and each voice that and record it and send it back. So we're really moving into a new time. I don't think taking into account of what Tesla is doing, as far as they just started off with cars were their first robots, but the next robots will be humanoid robots, and that's a big change in society.
Conversational robots. That's what ChatGPT is, a conversational robot. Go ahead, Sam.
So there's going to be another leap, as Josh is talking about one leap. I'm actually looking beyond self-driving cars, okay? Because it's already given that these cars will be high performance. I think we're going to get much, much better safety when we move beyond full self-driving to entire traffic systems. So in other words, imagine that we've got 50 Teslas all going down the road together, right? And instead of each one operating on its own, all 50 are communicating with each other. And not just with each other, but with the sensors and the compute systems in each intersection and across the entire city, and feeding this into a large learning model. And saying, okay, well, the first car up there saw this little basketball bounce out into the street. So now all 50 cars, 1 microsecond later, are all informed of that piece of information. And they're not just reacting to just the 1 or 2 cars just in front of them.
Right.
Yep. Do you use Waze, Sam?
What?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you use the Waze app that Google bought?
Yes, I do use Waze.
And the way that all the people, like, you get it pops up and says, do you see the accident there? Do you see what other people are saying?
The last 15 years or however long I've been using Waze, yes.
Yep, so that's already started.
And Google Maps, by the way, is still not incorporated all of those features into Google Maps. It's still 2 separate apps right now, okay?
I think they just incorporated it a few months ago.
Well, they still have 2 separate apps. And certain capabilities in one still don't exist in the other. So anyway, look, we can think about these things from good outcomes, but the same system that I just described could also be corrupted. Suppose somebody got control of that system, right? You can imagine the horrific scenarios that they could create.
Yeah,
So,
injecting misinformation.
not just that,
Yeah,
but
but are you? But Sam, are you fear mongering? I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but I'm saying since 1996 they put computer chips into cars, so technically I could get
no, I'm not
control if I knew what I was doing with radio frequency.
It is not fear mongering to ask good systems thinking questions, because systems thinking has to consider the boundary conditions. Okay, somebody else can,
That's a great question, but I'm saying there is no such system that couldn't be corrupted in some way, shape, or fashion. I'm just saying
which is why you have to address it up front and not let the fear mongers take over the conversation. It has to be part of the design.
The one thing they do, and we do it here, is that two peers mutually agree on an encryption key that a third party can interfere. Now they can jam the signal, they can cut the signal, but they can't inject false information in a signal that's encrypted at both ends with an encryption key that can't be discovered.
With
If you remember correctly, if you remember the autopilot, selfless, pilotless car, well, the biggest fear was the car can have a car bomb and drive into a building, right? So, that's one of the reasons why, prevent this driverless car, right?
But I can build what I'm trying to say, Sam, is I can take right now on any car past 1996, I can use a radio control and turn your car into a driverless car right now, build a semi truck that I can drive into a building.
Yeah.
And I would never do that, by the way, CIA, whoever's listening. I would never.
But the government makes cruise missiles all the time, and every big country's got cruise missiles. What's it? It's a driverless bomb.
Look, wait. I think you guys are now straying into the corner case. I'm talking about to build a healthy system, you still need to deal with boundary conditions. I'm not arguing against that you can always pervert any system if you know how it works.
Right. No, the reason I bring this up at this moment in time is because, okay, now we have it. What did we learn from it? How did we deal with it? What was acceptable for the society, for the authority, for the government to approve this so that we did go forward? Because if we didn't go forward, we'd have been stuck 20 years ago and the driverless car would forget it. It would never happen. But we did go forward. So a lot of learning, a lot of feedback is in that data collection. We can learn from it. How do we deal with it at this time? What happened? Who got the approval? What needs to be approved? All that.
Yeah, the regulations are very important. And I'm not saying, Sam, that we shouldn't have regulations. And, if you ever, the Tesla Corporation has I think it's 7 nines, 99.99999, 7 nines past the point. Safety conditions. And it's usually 7 to 9 different systems. So it's not one, in order to keep that safety there. Thus, in those types of scenarios, if someone was trying to drive a car, if it had a sensor that said, wow, this car is extra heavy, or if it had a sensor that said, there are unknown chemicals in this car, let's shut it down. So there are ways of safety and regulations to keep from those scenarios. I'm not saying we shouldn't look at those scenarios, but at the same time, that shouldn't be the de facto stop of let's not build a system if it's not safe now. Let's build a system that is safe by looking at what we can do in terms of feedback loops to stop those things. And it takes a lot of, like, any kind of regulation is a constant, like the beginning of this conversation, there can't be just one rule of regulation. The rules have to change as we evolve our thinking and understanding of these systems to create these safety methods, which is why regulation is so important. Not to go on a big diatribe, but I just watched a video of a white British man in Bangladesh to buy a train ticket for the local train, which is super dangerous, to ride on top of the train like the locals do. And the people at the train station were like, I don't want to sell you that ticket. And he's like, please sell me the ticket. And they're like, no, you will get hurt. was saying, I will not sell you the ticket. And he kept begging them. And finally, he got the ticket and he climbed up on top of the train. And it was quite dangerous. There were tree branches coming. And knowing that they have a system and a way of life over there that is super dangerous for all of their citizens is one thing. But when a foreigner comes in and wants to participate in the system that is that country's culture and way of doing things, they are even smart enough to say, no, this is not meant for you. You do not take the risks that we take as citizens of Bangladesh. And
Don't
I think
try.
it's important to realize the risk and rewards that different cultures take. If I want 99.9, that's good enough for me. But for all the population, it should be 9 to the seventh digit. And with that, I'm complete.
Thank you. It reminds me of a story that about 25 years ago. I have a customer that called me up, Sam. My friend told me that if I buy this compact server, at that time it was compact server, my business will be successful. I say, no, I'm not selling the car. Tell me more. I now want to know your friend.
That happens every day in drug deals.
Yeah.
Most of when I was, in the streets with drug dealers, a lot of them were so serious about not giving drugs to their friends. They would sell it to everyone else just to buy drugs, and they knew you. They would say, no, I don't want you to get hooked. I see what happens to all my customers. I make tons of money, but I like you, Josh, and you are not allowed to buy drugs from me because I will not sell drugs to you.
What if I buy from you and then destroy in front of you?
Exactly. And I see that with all the Muslims, especially in New York City, all of the smoke shops and alcohol, all the corner stores are run by very devout Muslims who do not smoke or drink,
Right.
trying to sell it to all of the Christian or whatever any other belief system that wants to buy alcohol and tobacco. Go ahead, but they personally do not partake in their own products. It's quite interesting.
We may be an unsustainable species. Probably are.
I think that's a foregone conclusion. The question is, will there be a subset of us that will try and succeed at leveling up? The
Well,
species in general,
You have the
that's
engineers. You have the the Dalai Lamas and the engineers and the people who try to lead exemplary lives or constructive lives, but they're a tiny minority.
and they're not connected.
have we done it? Sorry, Sarah, just to answer that question, have we done that in the past? And if so, how long was that time of sustainability? And I reference people like Emperor Ashoka in India who adopted Buddhism for the country. And there was a time where Muslims or this is before Muslims actually, there was no such thing as the Muslim religion, but there were times when people all adopted systems that worked for everybody, point where foreigners or people from outside the system came in and corrupted it.
Yeah.
Civilizations. If you look at the ancient Incas in Peru, there's a place called Moray that I went to where they adopted a system of terracing the land with 2-degree temperature differences, the most perfect potatoes that could be carried long distance. And their reign of the kingdom went all the way from South America in Peru all the way up to North America to Vancouver because of these types of adoptions of food, ways of transporting food over long distances. So there are systems and cultures that have figured out ways of feeding large populations at scale at their time with their population and building cities. There's cultures in Mexico that, in what was it, 600 AD had cities of over 1 million people that were sustainable. But for how long? I think that's the question. What is sustainability for 300 years good? Is it 2,000 years? Is it 6,000? I don't even think the Earth is sustainable. We know that it gets hit by meteors. We go through two giant meteor highways every year. It's just a probability that we will get struck between June or September when we pass through these big asteroid belts. And we know volcanoes happen. We know that there was a big earthquake in Morocco a couple days ago.
Yep.
It's
You know, there's a new
we're not.
disaster movie coming out in December. Have you seen the trailer on it that just came out?
No, which one is this?
Well, I'll tell you the name of the studio. Toho Studios. Recognize the name?
Mm-mm.
In 1954, a Japanese movie company called Toho Studios issued the first of a huge series of disaster movies. It was called in Japanese Gojira, in American English Godzilla, and there's a new one coming out in December, also by Toho Studios, and you know the Godzilla franchise is an allegory about disasters. And the first ones were because of the H bomb. And here we go. I mean, people have this tremendous fear of annihilation, that the whole world's going to go to hell in a handbasket. And here we have a creation myth for disasters, the Godzilla franchise, and there's a brand new one coming out in December. It's called Godzilla Minus One. And the reason it's called Minus One is because the very first one that came out in 1954 was in reaction to the introduction of the H bomb, the hydrogen bomb.
Yeah.
This one takes place in 1947, shortly after the end of the Second World War, and it's the creation myth of Godzilla. And of course, there's no H bomb in 87, there's still only A bomb. So they're rewriting the creation story of the disaster allegory, and it's going to come out, and it's going to be a blockbuster. You watch.
Well, I have a question. Like we talk about sustainable systems in large factories, they have these on the wall that say how many days since our last accident.
Yeah.
Get to 1 week. You try to get to a month. You go on and oh, someone chopped their hand off. Okay, set it back to zero. But if we could build societies where we just try to see like a game, how many years of peace can we have? Can you imagine a global society that says how many days since the last war?
Zero.
And then inevitably some factions go to war, they put it back to zero, and then the gauge is the measurement, the metric is how many weeks can we go without two countries fighting each other.
1.5 million people a year worldwide die of violence, state-sponsored violence under the color of law. 1.5, it used to be 2 million a year. Now it's 1.5 million a year die from state-sponsored violence somewhere in the world.
I was just listening to a really interesting podcast last night where people were talking about the AIDS crisis and why was the AIDS crisis so bad in places like Africa. And a very simple factor was brought up. If you have malnourishment of people, you have a weak immune system, which can lead to the ability to contract a virus that even compromises your immune system more. So if you start with a really weak immune system, you're more likely to contract more. In other words, the one thing that I think we haven't done in this world is try to see how many days we can go without anyone dying of starvation.
Not going to happen. You know what tomorrow is? Tomorrow is the 22nd anniversary of 9/11. And the one model that Americans do not adopt for what happened on 9/11 of 2001, the enemies of the United States they tried to attack 4 buildings, they only effectively attacked 3. They attacked the twin temples of Mammon and Kronos and the Temple of Mars. The twin temples of Mammon and Kronos and the Temple of Mars. They attacked the symbols of our cultural religion. And if you go back to when Alaric the Goth sacked Rome, he attacked the government buildings and the banks, and he left the churches alone. Same story. The Temple of Mammon and Kronos, the Temple of Mars. That's what was attacked.
Yeah, he was afraid of that God might get after him because God doesn't stay in the church around.
He went after commerce and government.
Yeah.
Well, 9/11, commerce and government and military. That's what was attacked. There's a day of mourning in Judaism called Tisha B'Av. Tisha is what I think the 7th day of the month of Av. And the reason it's a day of mourning is the Temple of Solomon was destroyed on that day. And then a number of years later, the second temple was destroyed on the same day. And there's a bunch of disasters that happen on Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av is like 9/11 for Jews. It's the day of the big calamity where all the things that we hold sacred, commerce and government and military power, gets attacked. So 9/11 is like Tisha B'Av. It's the day of the Holocaust.
So what's the lesson to be learned from this ethically or more morally? What's the lesson to be learned from these things?
That what Sam said about values, that human values vary from one culture to the next. Our value was power, money, wealth, commerce, in industry. And those were the values that was attacked. What do we attack? We attack communism or, whatever. So
I keep remembering, sorry, I just keep going back to I think it was 96, 97. I had a friend of mine who worked in Iraq, but sanctions, and she was telling me over a dinner party how many hundreds of thousands of children were dying from these sanctions put there, and what would that do to an entire Islamic world or Muslim world? Watch their brothers and sisters over in Iraq dying and their children dying of these sanctions. What kind of energy and feeling and emotional angst that would put if you are a 15 or 20-year-old child growing up in Saudi Arabia, knowing that your cousins and your extended relatives in Iraq can't feed their children because of sanctions from the United States. I'm just saying there was a lot of energy that was built up, starting with Afghanistan in the 1970s to the Gulf War to the sanctions. Yeah, anyway.
Matures in one generation. It takes about a generation, 15, 20, 25 years. And then those children who were helpless are now the warriors, and they're getting their retribution. It's predictable. The retribution is going to come a generation later from the survivors of their Holocaust.
Every story I've ever seen in Hollywood tells that story of the child that grew up in that pain, that watched their dad or their parents and grandparents get bombed and killed by an American drone, and then they grew up to be the terrorist and the evil person in the story.
Yeah, it's probably the classical story. The American version, Harry Potter, Diana Prince, Wonder Woman. Superman is the survivor of the destruction of the parents' planet. You have the down. Look at the villains in the Marvel comics. The Joker. Look at the backstory of the Joker. And so you have these characters who survive, the most horrific childhood conditions, and they grow up to be the superpower, either for good or for evil. and you don't know which they're going to turn out to be. Are they going to become the hero like Superman? Or are they going to become the villain like the Joker?
I mean, you only need a few Joker in the world.
Exactly. We elected one for the president not so long ago. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right of me, stuck in the middle again.
Because of the Joker, we are having this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, the wild card.
Exactly.
That doesn't conform. Yep.
So thanks to the Joker. Thanks to the Joker. Otherwise, we have nothing to talk about.
Well, that's what the movies are about. I mean, the disaster movies are big movies.
Yep.
And the Japanese, you know, they really wrote the book on disaster movies in 1954 in the wake of the H bomb. This is the 34th Godzilla movie. Almost every 2 years, there's a Godzilla movie. Well, it's been 70 years. 1954 is 70 years ago, 69 years ago. And there's been something like 34 Godzilla movies.
You know what I find fascinating, not to switch the subject, but when I watch these young tech journalists talk about the new tools of artificial intelligence, these large language models, the problem, they have to create a problem to solve in order to use the technology. They're going to say, okay, how do we solve homelessness? How do we solve, like we're talking here, how do we create a system of stability and peace? At least that's what I hope we're talking about is stability and peace. But how do we create systems that work for the many? The first thing they type in is what's better, Apple or Android? Like it just blows my mind that their lens and their perception of reality, because they're tech journalists, is Apple versus Android, as opposed to how do I fix the water system in Maui, in Lahaina? Like, how do I fix this 150-year-old water crisis problem that led up to this disaster that just happened a few weeks ago? They don't like. I'm blown away that the perspective of this younger generation is just, oh wow, it's rose-colored gold on my new Apple iPhone. Like, are you like, it's just, it blows my mind that the amount of money that was spent for the movie Interstellar, $160 million, is one half of the budget to send a rover to the moon that India used recently and landed successfully on, I think it was $75 million was the budget.
It's something not too big by comparison to NASA. We spent
to the Hollywood making a film about space. The budget on the last Marvel movie, I think, or no, what is it? Avatar was over $1 billion on this one movie.
We spend tons and tons of money on entertainment.
Yep.
Escapism. That's escapism, escaping from reality, because in the movie theaters, you know, you're not going to die in a movie theater. Well, maybe you will in Colorado now, but generally you don't die in a movie theater.
And just made my point, Barry. It cost more. Yeah, it's cost more money to escape reality than to deal with it.
Yeah. We're not very smart. You know, there's a Yiddish word sechel, which means brains, you know. And it's the word uses, they use the word sarcastically. When somebody does something really stupid, you say, sechel, brains. It's one thing I love about Yiddish is that great put downs in Yiddish.
By the way, in case you don't know, I have a lot of respect and understand and appreciate the escape route. Imagine you take away all the entertainment that we have today. What kind of world are we going to get?
The banality of obliviousness.
Can you explain the respect and appreciation you have, Sam? I'm trying to understand.
Think of this way: if your kids doesn't have a toy to play, what do you think that you would destroy in the house?
What was the premise again? Say it again.
I'm saying that I have I would say starting about 5 years ago, I'm beginning to have a lot of respect on, because I say we have a lot of pastime in America and entertainment and all that. I come to realize that how important that pastime, the escape is so important in the society, in the structure. Think of it as like what you call the black metals or whatever, they fill the gap between the atoms or whatever you call that. So I was giving Josh an example. Take away all the toys that your kids have and see what happens, and then report to me next week.
I, I did that the other day. I took away all her toys. We went for a walk, and she started playing with the rocks.
That's
And she
good.
collected each little rock and put it into. She found a bucket that had blown away from someone's yard, and she collected the rocks in the bucket.
Day one, and then we'll see what happens next week.
Okay, I'll do it again. I'll let you know. I'll keep reporting back. I'll take her toys away and see what she does.
People build houses out of bricks, and bricks are made out of mud. They took the mud and they turned it into bricks, and they built cathedrals out of bricks.
Of course, yeah. So entertainment is, the reason I got into this conversation is because I can't stand people put the headphone on 24/7, right? Go to sleep in the shower, they want to have waterproof headset. Like, what the hell's going on? I couldn't feel it until I one day, have a mental breakdown. Say, oh, escape is useful.
I have a friend who's got an adult daughter who's suffering from a mental disorder that's very disruptive, and her escape is music.
Yep.
Elvis or some particular genre of music, and that's her salve. That's her therapy.
Yep.
And these 2 centuries ago they would say religion is the opium of the masses. Well, today it's entertainment is the opium of the masses.
Yeah.
We're awash in entertainment. It's the new opium of the masses. You don't need to go to church to get a warm fuzzy for one day a week. Now you just go to the movies or put on the the record play, not the record player because they don't have record players, but whatever the music machine. Okay? And that's the new opium.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it's opium, more like if I remember, many, many years ago when my kids are toddler. So in the daycare, they give you a piece of paper to explain how the toddler behavior is. So like you cannot take a toy away from a toddler. You have to give the toddler a different toy to replace that toy that you take away. So entertainment is sort of like that. Unless you have something to occupy and entertain and keep them occupied, they need that. So it's like the toy, taking away the toy from the toddler is like giving the music so that the toddler doesn't destroy things in the house. So same thing as an adult, you need to give them occupied so that they're not a troublemaker. Busy, what we have said, keep you busy, it's away from busyness, keep you away from the troublemaking.
When on vacation, driving in a car, probably my father figured it out. They gave me puzzles to play with in the back seat. And I could sit and work with these little puzzles, for hours, quietly in the back seat of the car. And that worked for me. Now, it worked for, 5% of the population? Maybe you give them they're fascinated. But you got to give them, in the Dick Van Dyke Show, Dick Van Dyke would come home from work, and the 3-year-old kid was there, and he always had to give the kid something. He'd pick a paper clip out of his pocket and hand it to the kid, and the kid was thrilled. And that was the whole point, was you had to give the kid anything. It could be, a toothpick.
Yep. Something not to hurt themselves with, and they can play with, and like you say, pick up the rock from the ground, because that's one that's different from the sand. Pick up the dirt, it would be more difficult, or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So entertainment is a rock. Entertainment is the toothpick. Entertainment is the paperclip. Entertainment is whatever that occupy the empty space. Otherwise, will be hollow, will be scary, will be a phobia if you don't have that.
You know what I'm playing with in my hand that you can't see? A tie wrap. Just sitting here playing with a tie wrap. And a minute ago, I was just playing with, the USB connector. I play with, a fiddle with anything in my hands. just to keep my fingers moving.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything. It's just fiddling.
Yeah, entertainment for the put a headset on is the musical, the vibration, the frequency, the melody, the tempo, and all that stuff that keep you, engaged with the external world. So I have a lot of appreciation for pastime. So when the kids want to have pastime, like many of my friends have the kids, oh, they play video game all day long, and what do I do with them? They won't study and all that. So I say, well, join them. Learn how to play game with them, because when you're doing that, then they have now engaged with you instead of engaged with the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the work of a child.
Yeah.
I think you just made me think of Sam, when I started learning a method called Qigong, which is the energy exercise. And one of the first exercises I learned was to breathe from the left side of my body, the right side of my body, the middle, and all three together. And that game is still fun to this day. I learned that over 25 years ago. But just to practice, closing one nostril and try to not it's really hard to do, but for me it's easy, but you just try to expand the left lung and not the right one.
That's right.
And just to separate the two, it's a fun game. And I think it's something that as long as you're alive, you can keep doing. So it's
remember the children's cat's cradle, where you just take some yarn and you do really complicated patterns with your friend with cat's cradle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there was even a novel called Cat's Cradle. Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book. And I used to see the girls do Cat's Cradle, and I didn't even know what it was called, but it's very intricate.
Yep.
See, when you do that, you actually focus on one thing and one thing only. So some people label that as meditation, some people label it as mindfulness. But it's the same concept that you only focus on one thing and you block everything else out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I forget, Barry, I just watched a video. There's a mathematical subset called knot theory.
Oh, yeah.
And there's over 342 different types of knots. So that's what they were doing, those girls. Yeah. I did it with them when I was a kid. You're pulling it here, moving it here, and then seeing which pattern it creates. It's really fun game.
Yeah. It's probably an abelian group. I think the set of shapes that you have, it's like what's that twisty puzzle? They're abelian groups.
Qubit.
What's it called?
Qubit.
Qubit.
Cubic.
Qubit. No. Well, yes, that's the shape of it. Look, I can't even remember the name of it. But yeah, one of the most common mathematical abstractions in toys is abelian groups, the transformer toys that can change shape through a cycle of different shapes, but it comes back, and they're all examples of abelian groups.
Mm-hmm.
Get to it's beyond algebra, you get to group theory. Almost nobody ever gets to group theory except professional mathematicians. But abelian groups make fabulous games, fidget games. That's what they are.
Yeah.
We got 7 more minutes to go. I want to check with Sam to make sure he got the answer that he's expecting to get before we wrap this up.
I think it's a rich conversation. I think we can still push on the questions some more. So I still have more questions. I'm not seriously interested in diverting where the conversation goes. So I'll save the opportunity till next time to actually still pursue some of the implications and questions around that, systems and rules and functions topic. So
the challenge for me is how to take a system which is a kindergarten level rule and upgrade it to the next level of a agile rule or a protocol, and just find little opportunities to do a small incremental upgrade from a kindergarten level rule to something somewhat more sophisticated, to protocols, to functions, to models. And that's a long haul to get all the way up to systems, rules, protocols, functions, models, systems. And most people are still at the kindergarten level, of elementary kindergarten level rules.
That's why, to me, it's asking too much to expect society to do that. society must be okay with a small proxy of us or them or whomever. Okay, there's got to be some group that is recognized to think in a systems way,
yeah,
that essentially can provide options. And those options should not just be taken just because they come from this group. They should be testable. They should be refinable. They should be composable. They should be revisable.
yeah.
So those of you that have been listening for 5 or 6 years understand where I'm going with this.
Joshua?
Yeah, I just want to reference back to, that's a great question that you asked, and we've gone over this many times, protocols versus rules. But I think Barry brought up an applicable scenario that you can play, which is King of the Hill, which if you haven't played it, where one person stands on the top of the hill and it's everyone's job to throw that person off of the hill. And then once they've thrown that person off of the hill, they're the new king and start the game over. And now everyone's got to attack that person. It's much like playing tag, you're it.
Yeah.
But if you play that game enough with enough people, you'll start to learn system dynamics. And if you record that game, you'll see which people attack on their own individually and which do group attacks. And it's a very important thing to study if you do want to learn about rule-based systems versus protocols, so on and so forth. I think play King of the Hill.
And it's a Abelian group. Because you just
with that, I'm complete.
in some kind of a haphazard cycle. There's always one person who's going to be dethroned next.
And if I can build on that, if you use the method and figure this out, then you use the model that Steve Jobs did. It's like, let me figure out what the customer don't even know they need it yet. And then once you figure it out, you can then hand it over to the human race.
Look at that series, Game of Thrones. Big series on HBO, Game of Thrones. It's King of the Hill.
Yep. And I think if you play that game enough, someone will kick someone in the face, and that's when the game usually stops.
When somebody
When someone gets hurt.
for real.
Yeah. When I used to play that, we played that game as a kid when they would take all of the snow in the parking lot and they pile it up on the top of the hill, into a hill.
Yeah.
We would play King of the Hill on top of the snow piles. And it usually ended when someone flew far enough off the snow into the cement and got hurt.
There you go.
That's when the game usually ended, is when someone threw someone farther than the snow pile and they landed directly on their back or knocked the wind out of them. That's when the game would end. Yeah. Same with Game of Thrones. It ends when you kill everyone at the Red Wedding. That's when things go whoa.
Or your mother calls you in for dinner.
Yeah.
You get winded.
In other words, there's acceptable violence and then there's unacceptable violence. And I think that's with any system, you need that perturbation, is there's acceptable and unacceptable outcomes.
Yeah. And then you get the schism when you shun the guy who's too violent too often. Don't play with him. He's mean and nasty and he'll hurt you.
Well, that's another way the game ends. The biggest guys up there, no one in the group wants to go and attack.
Right, they go off and create their own separate cult.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of strategies, but schismogenesis, that was Gregory Bateson coined that term. How do the groups divide into separate tribes? Don't play with him. He's an asshole.
Again, a lot of negative things that we can learn from, a lot of positive things we can improve upon. Problem cannot be solved at the same level that we created them. Those are the few reminders that I would love to throw in.
So that's what I would like to double click on also. I think Einstein gets misquoted a lot there. I'd really like to understand what that means.
Oh.
Well, when a husband and wife is fighting, you need to get police involved or judge involved. That's simple as that. With the same level.
Focus to authority.
Yeah.
Authority is a fallacy. But if you're going to appeal to authority, appeal to authority like Einstein. Take it to the extreme. But
I don't really care who say that. What I care about is that it always works for me. Whenever there's a situation around that between me and somebody else, I need to get somebody else in the authority. Like two students fight each other, the teacher step in, and the teacher and teacher fight, the headmaster step in, the headmaster fight, the headmaster and headmaster fight, the judge step in, or the board step in. Again, that's the level of, because the outcome is a meta outcome versus the outcome you have is a same level outcome, which you cannot resolve it, because unless you sort of like satellite GPS, unless there's a GPS, we cannot drive and we don't know where it is. You ask your fellow driver where to go, he cannot tell you, or she cannot tell you, but the satellite can tell you. From my perspective, I don't care whether Einstein said or Martin Luther King said. I don't give a damn. It makes no difference to me.
Yeah,
All right,
I'll just add my.
Yeah.
Are you leaving, Sam? I just wanted to share the Thich Nhat Hanh rule when you're fighting with your wife. Go outside. Imagine it's 300 years into the future. How do you feel about that fight?
Well, another one, that when you fight with your wife, that means you are angry. When you're angry, means you are scared of something. Just figure out what you're scared about and get that taken care of.
If you're having an argument, it's a verbal argument fight, hold hands when you're having an argument with your.
Yeah, wish. Yeah, you wish. Hold hands. You don't go near 3 feet.
That means you have to drop the knife.
No, you hold hands like the Michael Jackson video with the two people tie their hands with the knives.
We have a saying, Barry, I think you'll love it. In Chinese, it said, you fight in front of the bed, at the end, the fight will end.
You both fall in the same direction. But the thing is, there's a feedback channel, tactile feedback channel. Where you're in tactile contact, you get an enormous amount of feedback that's not through the tactile channel.
Certain fight is, I would say, I would recommend that, but some fight is beyond that energy level. You want to touch each other. All right, my friend, another entertainment weekend. Appreciate it. Learn a lot, and love you guys. Take care.
Save the chat.
Where do I hang up here?
Thank you very